All right, so welcome back. We are back with another lesson. So I'm gonna do something interesting. I'm gonna go ahead and actually copy our function here, create a new file called 2.py and copy here. Obviously, I'm gonna clear this. So it just has a new line. So let's learn a little bit about the operators. Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and print 5 by 2. So guess what should be the output? Okay, so I'm just printing this, and I'm gonna also say 5. Let's say 5 star star 2, right? Think what should be printed, like just give it a thought, right? So I'm just gonna go ahead and run it. So I'm gonna say 2. So notice what it has printed. So it's 5 by 2, it printed 2.5. This one, it printed only the integer part, right? Then here it printed the reminder of the division, which also is called as modulus or modulo, or mod, right? So it's called modulus or mod, right? So should know that. And then this printed 5 raised to 2, which is 25. So something you should know, right? Then again, we learned if. So obviously, let's earlier, like we learned in the part 1, we learned conditional statement if. Now let's learn like a logical operator, right? So let's go ahead and say if, so I'm going to say age is equal to 30. I'm going to say if age is greater than 30 and age is less than 35. And I'm going to say, or I can say, like get your priority is right, because we should, like, and then I'm going to say else print take your time exploring the world, right? So let's see what happens now, right? So, and as always, let's go ahead and print our new line, and there we go. So notice it says take exploring. So yeah, something what we learned, this operator uh, is national, is a citizen. Let's say is citizen is equal to true, and then I'm going to say if not is citizen, print you need visa, right? And then else I'm going to say print you are fine, right? And then I'm going to say print, or it says a new line, right? New line here. So another operator that we should know is not operator. So notice that it says citizen is true, so you're fine. If I make this false, so not of false is kind of true, which means it's going to print you need visa. So let's go ahead and do that. So that's it. So it's something you should know. All right, so we learned about the not operator, we learned about the and operator. There's also an or operator. You should try it definitely. But we could let's learn about another very interesting operator, which is called as in operator or a membership operator. So let's say I'm going to create a list, and again 1 2 3 or 1 comma 2 comma 3, and I can say if 1 in a underscore list, print 1 is there, right? Something like this. So let's go ahead and print that, or run that. So notice it says 1 in there. You could also use it. So for example, I can say name is equal to Alice, right? And I can say if a in name print character a found, something like this, right? So let's go ahead and print that. So notice that it says character a found. So this membership operator can be used in different ways. It's quite useful. So now next up, let's learn about another sort of operator. This is kind of quite, let's say, confusing, but yeah, once you actually run it, you'll know it. So let's say b is equal to 20, and I'm going to say print id of a and then id of b, right? So let's first print this. So definitely. So notice that it prints the same ID here, right? So now if I say if A is B, print A, so A is B, right? Else, I'm gonna say else, print A is not B or A is not equal to B, whatever, right? So let's go ahead and print that. Notice that it says A is B, but let's say I make this 30 and print it. A is not B, right? Something you should know. All right, so where could you actually use this, right? So let's see that, right? So I have a code here where it says, okay, if letter is in Python, so in fact, all right, so where can you use it, right? So let's add a new line as always, and I'm gonna say um, for letter in Python, print print letter, right? So let's go ahead and save this and actually run it, right? So notice that it prints Python. Now what I can do is I can say if within this letter is O, right? I want it to be ignored, right? So I'm going to say pass, right? Another and then else, another concept here. So, and I'm going to go ahead and print this one. So notice where we can use this is operator, right? Quite useful. So notice, so it prints Pyth, doesn't print O, right? It prints N. So that's where you could use it. Okay, so now next up, let's again new line here. Let's go ahead and actually try to take an input from user. So I'm going to say user name is equal to input. What is your name, right? And then I'm going to say print. You said your name is, and I'm going to say user name, right? And I'm going to print it as an f string. So let's go ahead and run the program again. So notice that it now waits for my input. So I'm going to say my name is Nikhil. So it says your name is Nikhil. I'm going to go ahead and comment this because for the next set of concepts, right, we don't want always to give a name. The next interesting thing is, again, we're gonna circle back to list a little bit to know the function that you can run over the list, right? So let's go ahead and do that. But before that, let's do a little bit of a on strings, right? So let's say the name is equal to Johnny, right? And now what we can do is we can say print lane name, right? Then we can say print name, so name dot capitalize, right? And we can also say print name dot upper, right? And we can say print name dot is decimal, something like this. So let's go ahead and see what happens now, right? So notice that it says, okay, the number of characters here are 5, notice, and then we can also capitalize the first. Actually, we can make it small here and then again print it, so that way you can know capitalizes the first one, and then uppercase makes it fully uppercase at the upper function. And it is it decimal, is it a number? No, it's not, right? So it just prints no, right? Now why it is important, right? Notice that we didn't say name dot length, right? So there are some functions that are just defined at the level of Python, and then there are some functions that are defined at the level of object. So for example, for a string type object you get capitalized function. You don't get it for, like, let's say integers, right? Because it doesn't make sense. But this len function can be used across, let's say, strings, lists, and so on, which we will see a little bit later, right? So something you should know. We're going to take a look at classes and object a little bit later in the course, but good to know that, right? Don't get confused. All right, so let's learn some more. So I'm going to say list is equal to, and to you, this might sound like a set of concepts that are barely related to each other, but when you actually see a program using it or a set of programs using it, it's going to make a lot of sense, right? These are kind of important foundational concepts. I'm going to say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, let's say 1, right? And then I'm going to say print, right? one occurs, and I'm going to say a underscore list dot count of one, right? So, and then let's make this into an f string, right? And let's try to print it now. Okay, so notice that it occurs, one occurs two, and I'm going to say times here. And let's add a new line because this is a new concept that we're learning, right? And while we are at, so let's run it. So notice that one occurs two times. Now you could also go ahead and append something to the list, right? So we can say a comma list dot append, and I'm going to say 7, and let's go ahead and print a underscore list. So let's go ahead and see what happens. Notice that it gets appended, right? You could also sort a list, so we can say print a underscore list dot sort and this, and then notice that now the list is sorted. But now notice that there is, so actually hold on, so we actually got an output of none, right? So let's investigate why this happened. Okay, so what happens is when you do a list sort, it actually sorts the list in place. It doesn't really return a sorted list. So the way to call it is like, let's say I put it here and then a underscore list is printed again. So notice earlier it was printing none because this function returned a none. It just sorted it in place. So notice that now the list is basically sorted, right? So that's that. So another concept you should know, right? Now, next up, we are trying to understand a really important concept of classes and objects, right? So let's understand what a class is, right? So I'm going to say something that we have used. So we have said type of, and let's say list. Okay, so this, okay. So let's go ahead and print that. So notice that it says it is of the class type list. So a dot list is like an object of the class list. Class is basically a template. Now we can also, and then it has methods. So for example, so it has, for example, method is sort. One of the methods is sort, right? So let's create a class of our own. So let's create a class called car. So I'm going to say class car, right? And I'm going to say num of wheels is equal to 4, right? And then I'm gonna say init, right? And this is I'm defining this basically, right? Hold on, so let's see, I'm gonna call it this, right? And I'm gonna say, and it's, so just bear with me. So I'm gonna say model year, something like this. And I'm going to say here that self dot model is equal to model, and then self dot year is equal to year, and then I'm gonna say define run. This is a function, and I can say print print the car is running, and then let's call it, let's print, and then also let's say model year, and let's give it a speed also, right? And I'm gonna say self dot year is equal to year, or speed is equal to speed now. So I'm gonna say the car self dot model is running at, and I'm gonna say self dot speed km per h, something like this. And so actually this should be class. Sorry about that. That's the error, right? So now let's see. So we created a template. This is kind of like a static sort of a variable, right? Because mostly all cars have four wheels, right? So that's not going to change. What is going to change is basically the model year, and let's say, and I'm not going to put speed here because speed is not, it's not a, it's not something common, right? I mean, it's, so let's say I'm going to put speed here instead, right? And I'm going to say here. So basically what I'm saying here is a car, the most, all cars have this common characteristics, which is number of wheels, which is 4. Then when a car is uniquely identified by, it is identified by its model and a year, right? Let's say Corolla 2025, something like that, right? Or so on, right? And then the speed, like this is just a function and I'm just printing it. So let's go ahead and see how to create an object for it. So I'm gonna say uh, new car is equal to car of, and notice now it's already asking me to add model. So I'm gonna say Corolla, and I'm gonna say 2026, let's say, right? And then now, just like you said, list dot sort, we can say car dot, rather new car dot. Notice you get an option to run it, and notice that we actually need to give it a speed. So I'm going to say 100 kilometers per hour. So now let's try to print it, right? So notice that it takes, okay. So let's see what happened here. So we have an error here, right? So it says it takes, run takes one positional, but we gave two. Okay. So all of the methods should have this. Self is automatically like included. So you have to define it that way. Now let's go ahead and run it. So this should run. And notice that it says self model and speed. That's because we didn't make it into an F string. So let's make it into an F string. So you should like code with me or with this video, right? It's going to help you a lot. So notice what we have done. We have created a template or a class in this case, right? And we can always say, hey, print most cars have, and we can say new underscore car dot num. So I'm going to say f string here so that it's able to complete it, right? Fields, right? And you could also access it with print car dot number of wheels as well, right? So let's go ahead and print both. Notice that most cars have four wheels. You can access it as a class variable also, which is what it is, right? So these are called as instance variable, meaning a new car, or let's rename it. So I'm going to rename it to Corolla, right? So most cars have four wheels. So we are making it as a static sort of a class variable. And then for every instance, you can have a different model and a different year, right? In this case, Corolla 2026, right? And that's what we're doing here. This is a constructor which constructs an object for that particular template, which is class. And then this is just a function of that class, just like how we had list.capitalize, list.append. Internally, it is just running on that object to append this. Similarly here, we're just running the car by running this particular function, right? So again, high level, but kind of important. So we learned this concept now. Now, we earlier saw that you could actually create a person or an employee with a dictionary or with a tuple, but generally class is the right way to go about it, right? Which basically encapsulate all the properties, right? Maybe static and the dynamic properties of the particular template or an object in this case, right? And also all the functions that the class can perform, right? So let's extend this concept a little bit and learn about some another important concept of inheritance, where one class is inheriting properties from another class, right? So let's go ahead and do that. So I'm going to say class person, right? And so let's go ahead and create that class. As you know, it should have init, right? So I'm going to go ahead and define the constructor, right? And what does a person have, right? They definitely have, uh, right, a name, right? So which is a string. So I'm going to say self dot name is equal to name, right? And so this is all the class. This is all the class or the object has, and I'm going to say class employee is a person, right? And I'm going to say here, and I'm going to give it some additional properties. So I'm going to say def underscore init, right? So let's say underscore underscore, and I'm going to say self, right? And employee or employee ID, right? Which is int, right? And I'm gonna say basically self dot employee ID is equal to employee ID, right? And then now what we can do now is you can say def print details, right? And let's go ahead and say print uh, employee and name, right? Will be self dot name and employee ID as self dot ID, and I'm going to use an F here, F string, right? So let's go ahead and actually create an employee. So emp1 is equal to employee, right? And it requires an employee ID. So I'm going to say 100, and we're going to say emp1 dot print details, right? Something like this. So let's go ahead and do that. Run it, right? So now notice that we get an error here, right? Where it says for print details, right? So again, we should know that every function within it, it should take input as self and then rest of the other input. Hopefully, hopefully that fixes it. So let's go ahead and run it again. So notice that now it says it has no attribute name. Now we expected it to work, didn't we? Right? But uh, because employee is a person, right? So there's something that we missed here. So let's go ahead and add that. So what we did not do, right, is we said, yeah, person is or employee is a person, but we didn't really initialize kind of the person within the employee, right? So let's go ahead and do that, right? So I'm going to say super, which is the super class, dot underscore underscore init, right? And I'm going to say uh, so now what has happened here, notice that is we said 100, right? But we never gave the employee a name, right? So we should ideally take that as input as well. So I'm going to say employee name as str, right? And now what we're going to do here is we're going to say Bob. Okay, so it's good that we are encountering errors and fixing it. This is something you're gonna get otherwise also, right? So let's go ahead and give it employee name, right? So now what we are doing here essentially is we are saying, hey, I want to initialize the superclass of this class, which is person class, with this employee name, right? So person can be created with a name, right? And when I create an employee, right, I'm basically giving that employee name Bob, but that's actually the name of the person within the employee, and this is what is doing that. So hopefully, let's see now what happens. Okay, so now it says employee object doesn't have ID. Yeah, that's this error. So I think we didn't really use the right variable here. So hopefully now it should be fine. So notice that the employee name is Bob, employee ID is 100, right? So what did we learn? So we have this base class, it is called as a base class. We have a class which inherits from this base class, and within its constructor, what we are saying is, okay, for the person, which is the super of this employee, initialize that with the employee name here, right? And then add it additional sort of an instance variable or additional property of employee ID, right? Because person may or may not have an employee ID, but employee does, and we added that and then we printed the details, right? So that's something that we learned, right? All right, so let's quickly summarize what we learned in 2.py, right, or the second lesson of this. So we just got our new line as is from previously. We learned some mathematical operators. We learned some logical, or you would say operators like and. We didn't really take a look at or, but you can check it out, right? We additional operators like not, in, right, membership operator, right? And then we also learned is operator, kind of useful. And then we went ahead and learned some useful functions, and then functions on the objects of certain types like string, and then on also on the list, And then we actually, very importantly, learned a little bit of object orientation in Python, where you can create a template or a class and then instantiate it with an actual instance like this. It has constructor, it has like class variables, and it has functions. The way we explained it is when we say a underscore list dot append, basically there must be a class, right, called a underscore list, or a structure a underscore list, which has this function, right? So similar concept, but we created our own custom sort of a class here. We also learned inheritance. This is going to be kind of useful. Again, we are skimming the surface, but we want to get to the actual courses, right? So we are trying to keep it simple and to the bare bone essentials. All right, so make sure you do revise, and let's meet up in the next lesson. Thank you.